Good afternoon, everyone. It's midday. It's Wednesday, which can only mean one thing. It's Wow Ergonomics. So, hello, everybody. And we've got a full house today. Look at this, Stephen. Guests galore.
Guests coming out of our ears today, Graham.
Absolutely. Today, we're going to be talking about all things flexible. And I don't mean by that me getting my legs over the top of my head, because that's just never going to happen, especially on air. All right. We're talking about flexible working, or hybrid working, or agile working, as some people still want to call it. And we can talk actually at some point about all of those different terminologies, because I think in a way, the fact that we're now using all of these wonderful different semantics and words is probably quite confusing to people. And it might be good to break those down. So we're joined by Jill Scott. Hi, Jill. Thanks for joining us. Like to see you've got a very, very white room there, which is great.
I have, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I could never keep anything as clean as that in this house with all the young children.
I have to keep my kids out and the dog out, so this is my space. They're not allowed in, although the little dog creeps in every now and then and tries to get in, but no.
And we're also joined by Nicola. Thanks, Nicola Pease, for joining us. And again, actually, your house looks absolutely spotless. I don't know how you people do it.
It's because you can't see the devastation on the floor behind me. I'm just at the right angle. Like, the floor is covered in Lego and toys and all sorts of stuff, but you can't see it. So.
As Stephen knows, that's why I have a sheet here. Behind here is complete chaos. It's like the end of the world behind here. But, you know, I can get away with all sorts of murder for that. So we're talking about flexible working. Stephen, I know this is something that we've talked about over the past few weeks in terms of Wow Ergonomics. What news stories did really catch your eye over the last few weeks? And then perhaps we can get comment from sort of Jill and Nicola on those.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know we've touched on some of these previously, Graham, but I think they've sort of been the sort of the cornerstone of our conversations. I mean, the one that really, I mean, two, I think from, was it last week or the week before? One was Nationwide Building Society there, where they were talking about 13,000 staff, you know, flexible, don't have to work from the office. The other one I thought was quite interesting was TUI, the travel agents who, you know, the article was quite deceptive, because the headline was TUI are closing 46 retail stores. So obviously, you know, the theme of devastation to the high street is something that's been going on for a long time. But when you dug further down the article, what they were saying is they weren't looking to make people redundant. They wanted to use the expertise of those advisors, but they could work from home. So that was the really interesting thing, how there was that transfer of role from the high street with the sort of doom and gloom. But the reality is that there still would be a lot of people employed by the business from those stores, and they were looking to keep their expertise, not lose staff, keep the staff, but get them working in a different place. So I think Nationwide and TUI. The other one I think was Santander, which I can't remember whether, Graham, this story sort of broke after we spoke last week. But they were talking about, again, reducing office space, not necessarily reducing headcount, but giving people who were working in one office that was closing the opportunity to work part of their week in another office. So I think they're probably the three main stories that I guess sort of formed our conversation over the last two sessions of Graham, I think.
Well, I think there's those three, and then as a counteract to those three as well, I think it was all of the stories that came from Goldman Sachs. Oh dear, what happened there? that is, I mean, that really is contentious as well. So there was the story in particular, I think, of the 95-hour weeks.
Yeah.
Who has 95 hours in a week to work? And why are you working 95 hours in a week? These are questions that we will now start to debate. So ladies, Jill, Nicola, as I say, thanks for joining us. Just to give people a little bit of background in case they've not heard of you before, perhaps starting with Jill, tell me why you're interested in flexible working.
Oh, well, Graham, I've actually been interested in flexible working for over 20 years. This is not a new subject to me at all. And I have myself been working remotely, flexibly for all of that time. And to me, this is like just a fantastic opportunity for people to see how it can really work, because all of those people who a year ago were saying, oh, there's all sorts of jobs that can't be done remotely or flexibly, or it's all too difficult, suddenly had to change their mind overnight, didn't they? And you know what? We're all still here and it's all worked out. And have there been many stories of disaster and devastation because people haven't made it work? No, of course there haven't, because most people are very sensible and adapt to the situation. And this sort of mindset that says, oh, I need everyone in one place at one time and we'll all cram onto public transport at the same time and we'll all cram into the same space to do any type of work, whether or not it's sensible for it to be done in that collective way, is so old-fashioned, isn't it? We have so much technology, we have so many more tools that are available for collaboration and working remotely. And what I think is really funny is Goldman Sachs are international, so they should be at the forefront of this revolution that says, we need actually to recruit from wherever people are the best talent, and to do that, flexible working is the model. What's not the model is working ridiculous hours where I absolutely guarantee you half of those hours are not productive. Nobody can work productively. So you might be churning out the hours, but I honestly guarantee if they did a proper research project on the output of those people. I also saw a statistic that said about 20% of them are off with burnout at any given time in certain offices at Goldman Sachs. And it's like, do you know what? You need to sort of look at this side of the equation and this side of the equation before you think you're doing it right. So sorry,
Absolutely.
I've taken up a lot of time there. I should give Nicola an opportunity to speak.
That's fine. Nicola's coming now. So Nicola, introduce yourself, please, and just say why you come to the fray in terms of flexible working.
So flexible working is just my bag. That's what I do. So I set up my company end of 2019 to sort out people and help them make flexible working work for them. So slightly before the pandemic. And for me, it started, I've been doing this. I was working out actually. The first time I did this type of thing, we called it a Working Smarter project, which was about empowering people to work from anywhere, really, wherever, when, where, and how you are going to be most productive and effective. That's where you can work. And it was back in 2014. So the first time I did this was 7 years ago. And similar to you, Jill, what I'm really loving at the minute is, whereas previously the work has been pushing water uphill, and it's been that battle with people of like, oh, it'll never work for our industry, or it'll never work for these type of roles, or we don't trust our people. Like, what if they're taking their dogs for a walk in the day? Like, how will I know what they're doing? And all of those objections have just been wiped out in this last year, because we've been forced to kind of change and change the way we work. And so, like you were saying, it's made us all go, oh, the world didn't end. Most companies still survived. Most people were still productive. Maybe there's something in this. And I think for me, what I'm enjoying seeing right now is the companies that are starting to listen to their employees and going, actually, yeah, a lot of people do want to carry on working from home some part of the time. Yeah. How can we enable that? How can we make that happen? Unless obviously you're Goldman Sachs, who wants everybody back in their office. Although I did, interestingly, I did read, or I saw someone else on LinkedIn saying that it's no wonder they want people back in the office when they've just spent £1 billion on refurbishing their Canary Wharf offices, including adding sleep pods, because they do not want you to go home. It's no surprise then that they're saying working from home is abhorrent, is it?
Why bother with a home at all when you can live permanently in the office and sleep in a little dog? That sounds like a massively desirable lifestyle, doesn't it? You know, I'm sure everyone's going to be on board with, oh, that sounds great.
Yeah, and then I don't know if you saw in the news last night, sorry, this is going to be a Goldman Sachs bashing, but last night I saw that
Nicola, don't worry about it, they deserve it.
That the managers, the team leaders of those junior staff who had been complaining about the 95-hour week, out of their own pockets provided hampers of food and snacks. Yes. And I'm like, Goldman Sachs, and the amount of money that they have and the profit that they make, and they're not even willing to go, do you know what, we'll do something nice for those people. It's come out of their pockets of the people, the managers of those teams. So I was just like, it says it all about the culture of Goldman Sachs, really.
Well, let's just make it absolutely clear that we're not against Goldman Sachs in any shape or form. And if someone from Goldman Sachs wants to come and give us an alternative viewpoint on this, they're more than welcome to come on air and give us an alternative viewpoint anytime. If not today, they can come on another week and do it. I'd be really interested in having that conversation.
Graham, I'm just going to say on Goldman, well. Yeah, there was two things about that Goldman Sachs. I think we might have touched on it as well, but it was almost if this 95-hour week was some sort of badge of honor. It was something to be proud of. I mean, I'm thinking it was almost, well, okay, I don't get that. But also we were saying as well about how people's performance will decline as the more hours they work. If these people are in charge of billions of pounds of investments, how is their work performance when they hit hour 86, 87, 88? Are they then making the wrong decisions because they're being overworked? And I think you called it out, Graham. Why don't they, these are very well paid jobs. Why not work half the hours and employ two people?
Shocking idea. Absolutely shocking idea. Just imagine that. Two people doing one role.
Sounds like a job share to me.
It does, doesn't it? Does sound like a really good idea. So yeah, I'm going to go on to some of the things that were brought up, and I have to apologise to Nicola at this stage because I did obviously share that BBC story about Nationwide early in the morning to you, and you did a post on it. And I've just watched over the last week or so as more and more people have commented on it. And I've done similar polls myself on this whole subject, and of course people have opinions to this sort of thing. So one of the kind of counter arguments that comes back is, but these people are earning really good money. They must be earning really good money. Does it matter? Does it matter? Can't they do their 95-hour week? Surely in a couple of years' time they'll be able to retire. Any comments on that?
Or they'll burn out, I would go for, rather than likely to retire in 2 years, more likely to burn out in 2 years. I think yes, they are very well paid, but it sort of strikes me as a way of saying, well, people are only motivated by money, so it doesn't matter. We can flog them to death as long as we're paying them enough money, and it's not about the well-being or the motivation of people even to have something that's fulfilling and have a life outside of work. Like if you're working 95 hours a week, that doesn't leave a lot of time for any other sort of life, does it?
Even sleeping. But the other thing is, however highly paid you are, you're still a person. Work-life balance is not just for people who are lower paid, is it? If it is, there's something wrong with that whole model, isn't there? They are still people. However much you get paid, you still only have 24 hours in your day, the same as all the rest of us do. So this idea that somehow, it doesn't matter because you are being financially compensated, for me is a totally wrong approach to the whole culture that seems to say, if we throw enough money at it, it doesn't matter. It's weird, isn't it? At the bottom of the pile, we're like, people are disposable. Does that also mean, people are disposable anyway, providing you compensate them? I mean, Merrill Lynch actually had someone die from overwork, didn't they, in 2017? And what we learned since then, those high-performing people just seem to be saying, there's always more people in the pipeline. It's about a culture that sees people as disposable. That's what's wrong. Not just Merrill Lynch. I know we're talking about them and we're talking about Goldman Sachs. Not just those, but that whole culture that says money is the answer. It's just wrong, isn't it? Time is the issue there. And
I used to see
Nicola
this.
Said, you can do nothing, can you? If you're working 95 hours a week, that's your.
I was just thinking, Phil, if you do some mental maths on this, and my maths could be wrong, 95 hours, that's doing a 7 in the morning till 8:30 in the evening, 7 days a week. Is that about right? About 30 and a half. When you think of 95, break it down into every single working day. You're starting at 7, finishing at 8:30 every single day.
And I bet that doesn't include the commute to work.
Absolutely. That's just ridiculous, isn't it? There is
So you
no one for
literally
whom
get
that's
out of your bed,
desirable.
get out of your bed, you roll into work.
Yeah.
Right. Do your commute, roll into work, etc. Finish work, roll home, get into bed. You probably have a couple of hours sleep, get up again.
So you must be up at 5, mustn't you? Really?
Yeah.
5:30 by the time you add your commute on, unless you live really close to Canary Wharf, which I suspect most people don't. And then you get home. If you've got a family, how much of them are you actually going to see? And if you're working 7 days a week, you never get that break, do you?
I can't imagine anybody that's working a 95-hour week has got a family. I can't imagine. And if they have, they're not going to keep their family. They're not going to keep their family.
They're absent all the time, aren't they?
I'd love to know if that's a thing and it's been going on for a while. I'd love to know the divorce rate. Anyway, it just would not happen. Oh hi dear. Oh hi. Bye again.
Who are you actually? Because I've not seen you. For the last. Oh, no, I know I saw you for that hour about 3 weeks ago. I remember you now. Seriously, that's what it would be like, wouldn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, let's take it.
Terrible.
Let's take this away from the Goldman Sachs scenario, because that's potentially madness. But even so, there's still an awful lot of people working really long hours, etc., on a day-to-day basis. For me, I think it just goes back to finance again. I don't actually understand how, for any business, it makes them more money. It's what Stephen said earlier. How does that make them any more money by employing people to work so long in a day that actually they start to become unproductive? At the point at which anybody becomes unproductive for you, then actually you're losing money by employing that person. It makes, there's slightly more paperwork to do, etc. There's slightly more national insurance bits of coding that you have to do to put another person on the payroll. But when you're talking, especially when you're talking a large company like that, that's all kind of taken care of anyway. What's it matter to actually give part of that role, as you say, job share with another person, keep the teams fresh, and really have people that are coming to work wanting to be on it, wanting to do a really good job and feeling like they've got a life outside of work as well.
Well, of course, technically, they're probably not on 95-hour contracts. They will be on, I don't know if we've still got the working time directive, but we should have. So this shouldn't be on 95-hour week contracts, but doesn't it become the culture that there's an expectation that everyone will work huge numbers of additional hours and their overall salary is reasonably good to reflect that? But I'm not sure they would see it as, actually, if we split this job in 2, we would have people working sensible hours. They see it as a cost, don't they? We would have to pay somebody else to do the hours. Whereas, as we've been saying, I don't think that takes account of the effectiveness, the burnout, all of those things that are direct human costs. Even if you think, this model is fine, it's actually not really cost effective if they really analyse the amount of work people can possibly do. So,
one could argue it's modern slave labour, isn't it?
Yeah, the Nationwide are actually a really good example because they've always been a great employer and they understand that you are only as good as your people, and protecting, Nicola mentioned well-being, that doesn't seem to be on the agenda with some companies, and that's the important part, isn't it? If you nurture and support and understand the needs and the well-being of your staff, they will give you back so much more. And it isn't just about the hours they work, but in commitment and motivation and enthusiasm for your company. All of those things add up to massively better performance, in my opinion. So that sort of feed people in here, have them as fodder, feed them out the other end model I honestly think that it's going to die out because people will vote with their feet. Already there's these rumblings of discontent, which before there was much less of that. And now I think people have discovered life, haven't they? They've discovered the importance of space and gardens and not commuting. That's the other thing. It's not just about flexible working, it's a whole lifestyle thing that suddenly people have realised, oh, I can work somewhere different and I don't have to spend up to 2 hours commuting, packed in trains with everybody else, which is not fun. I can actually do a really good job. I can do it from my home office or from a nice environment. I know not everyone can do that. I'm not saying that is the sort of magic wand for everyone. Like giving people that option has opened their eyes in a way that I don't think anything else could. And that's why the companies that are thinking about staff well-being are going to flourish in the future. And those that don't are going to be left behind, in my opinion.
And I just want to take Nicola up on this because I noticed one of the comments that you made to somebody on that post yourself, because there's a misunderstanding that actually what you're talking about is working from home as opposed to flexible working. And I think we have to make very, very clear that the two things are really very different, because taking it back to our area, Stephen, of the sort of adjustment, etc., you know, one of the issues here is, you know, we've been called to go in and firefight for companies before now in terms of the ergonomic piece, and, you know, potentially in terms of, for myself, you know, other things like mental health piece, etc. as well, because someone is struggling. And you quite often you come back to, as a first point of call, you say, oh, well, yeah, okay, we can get them a different mouse or a different chair, or we can make them more comfortable, or we can, you know, we can give them more rest breaks, etc. But you think, but you're making them work 50 plus hours a week. Isn't that the starting point of all of this, the amount of hours that you're working? So just to explain to anyone that really hasn't got this in their head yet, what is the difference between working from home and flexible working?
So working from home is an option in flexible working, is how I would describe it. So flexible working in its truest sense is thinking about when, where and how you do the work. So it could be you're working from home all of the time. It could be you're working from home part of the time, and that's the when piece. It could also be you're working from not a set office, a fixed desk. You might have different offices. So the very first project I did, we had 2 sites that were kind of 30 minutes away from each other drive. And what we discovered people were doing is they were driving several times between the 2 sites to have meetings every day. And we were like, that is just insane. Why are you not sit in one place, do a conference call? Or sit at home and do a conference call. So the where piece can be home. It can be also, this is a little I feel like I'm going to rant slightly. This is one of my bugbears at the minute, is that working from home is being badged as the way we've all been working for the last year. And yes, we have all been working from home in the last year, but it's not the same as working from home when there isn't a global pandemic on and we are not in lockdown. Working from home means you can also work from the local cafe, work from a co-working space, go into a different office. What I loved about the nationwide announcement was they're looking at how they can use their network of branches for people to go into the branch and work for the day. Like, how great is that? So we've all got a local, like, nationwide branch. So if that's closer for me than going into head office and I want to sit in the office and I need to socialize or see people, isn't that a great place to go? So that's the where of flexible working. Then the when of flexible working is the hours piece. So it is that how many days you're working, what hours are you working? Are you working like a standard 9 to 5 type hours? Do you what a lot of people have done in the last year, which I think is going to be interesting as companies move forward with this, is because we've been juggling everything over the last year of, like, some people have been homeschooling, or you've had the kids at home, or you've had everything else that we've got going on in our lives right now. People have been doing work not starting at 9 and finishing at 5 in pockets of time throughout the day. So if for some people it's easier to work 3 hours in an evening, does it matter? Does it need to be between 9 and 5? And I think it will be interesting to see how that kind of plays out over the next year or two. So that's the when piece. And then the how is how much work. So one thing that's often forgotten in flexible working is we think about the where and the when, and we don't adjust the how much, particularly if you're going to be reducing hours, for example. So how many people have you spoken to who do a 4-day week, which means they do a full-time job in 4 days because they haven't adjusted the how much. But the how is also thinking about how am I going to be most productive and being intentional in where and when I work. So do I need to work with a group of people today? So let's intentionally all go into the office or all meet socially somewhere and collaborate on a particular piece of work. Or I need to get my head down and do a report today and I need to not be disturbed. So I'm going to lock myself away at home for the day and that's how I'm going to work today. And that they're the 3 pillars really of flexible working.
No, thank you. Now, I think one of the things that's really interesting in this whole area as well is the types of groups that have really become quite prolific during this whole pandemic period and have sprung up. So I was with them yesterday, the VA community, for example, and the freelancer community. Now, in a way, what that indicates to me, the fact that there are a growing number of VAs and a growing number of freelancers out there, and that's happened during this whole piece, is that actually companies are beginning to look at being able to buy in people's skills and time on a need-to basis. But surely an extension of that, if people want to secure people's skills into their organisation, more into a team, is actually just allow people more part-time contracts.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
I mean,
any comments on that?
There's always been this weird approach to part-time, sort of suggesting it's only for junior members of staff, which I've never really understood, because if people want to work fewer hours or actually have a better balance with other parts of their life, why would you not want to keep people who are often very skilled, very experienced? And as I think, Steve, it was you who said, why not employ 2 people? You know, I threw in job share earlier. I think that's massively underused because people say, oh no, you can't work part-time. This is a full-time role. Well, if it's a full-time role, why shouldn't I do part of it?
Yeah.
That reasoning has always eluded me, because often you get people with complementary skills and you actually get overall a better balance, because everyone is better at some things than other people, and you can actually tailor those jobs then so that one person's weaknesses are compensated by the other person doing that role. So I think the key for me is not just thinking in terms of how many hours are people working, but what are they producing? What are they delivering? If we focus much more on what actually is the point of this job and what outputs or do we actually want from people, then we actually sometimes get away completely from when are people doing it? Does it matter if people work in the evening? Does it matter? It's about focusing on outputs and encouraging communication so that people know, if you're in a team and somebody needs to cover certain things, clearly you need to make sure that's happening. But that's a communication thing. That's not about everyone's got to work these fixed hours. They've got to be in at this time. They've got to stop at that time. They've got to be in this particular location. That's about thinking, how can we best deliver? As you said, Nicola, there are certain types of work that are actually better done not in a communal space. But also people say, but what about those people in customer facing roles? It's not fair on them. There are ways you can be flexible with those people. You can encourage self-rostering and things like that actually give everybody some degree of flexibility. But it's not just about everyone working from home. And I did think Rishi Sunak, although I didn't agree with what he said, he did have a point in that sometimes you do want to be with other people. That's not necessarily in the office, as you said. That might be a sort of going into a branch or a local area where you're meeting some of your other colleagues. It might be a sort of team hub. So let's just not think the only options are working from home or being in the office. The government seems to be presenting this sort of dichotomy where there's only two options, and one is, we all do what we did before, and the other is we all do what we've been doing during the pandemic, as though there's no other choices, which is the thing I find really weird about the way the discussion's going.
I agree. Stephen, can I bring you in on that point? What did you think of the Chancellor's comments?
I can understand where it's coming from, but I think, as Jill said, but I think you do start to think an element of self. I mean, I think there's a lot of good things have come out, but is there an element of self-interest in the comments that have been made? Because if no one returns to the office, that one extreme, what's going to happen to all the transport workers? What's going to happen to all the catering and hospitality businesses that are around those offices? So I can understand that, but I don't think you can push that on. I think, like we said, there's two extremes being projected. The reality and the balance is the piece in the middle, where people do come in and use those facilities on a need to use basis, not because they have to. So I can understand the concern, and obviously he's then thinking, what about how does that impact the revenue? How does that impact the tax? I can understand where he's coming from. The reality is there is going to have to just change, like the high street is having to change. The reality will be, if you look at big city centres and the hospitality setups around those areas, they're not going to be able to rely on X number of thousand people being in a city centre every day. And I'll give you a really live example. I've been into Birmingham city centre today to drop off a sample to a customer. I've never seen, it was almost like a Sunday morning at 9 o'clock in the city centre. It was absolutely deserted. Now, that isn't a great situation to be in. The reality is we're not going to go back to the other extreme. We're going to have to find a happy medium. And there's going to have to be an element of adjustment, and there'll be some pain, but actually maybe it's a case of juggling resources round. Maybe we don't need as many people to run some of those coffee shops, or maybe to drive the buses and the trains, but actually are there ways we can, through retraining, rebalance and reposition those resources as humans? Because that it's just going to be a fact that, but can people move into different occupations? Can we move the labor market to the left or to the right or wherever to adjust to those new needs?
Well, we've talked about this before, Stephen, but I'd love to get Jill and Nicola's opinion of this. But to give you an example, you see, I think these kind of comments can only come from someone that's living in and around London.
Yeah, exactly.
Or in the middle of a city centre. Yeah,
a big
absolutely.
Urban area. Yeah.
Where I am, in the middle of nowhere in Somerset, things haven't actually changed that much. I mean, yes, there's some shops shut, etc. at the moment. You can't, you can only go to the supermarket, but most people only went to the supermarket in the first place. In terms of the general, melee of things haven't really changed. I'm not popping out every day to Pret a Manger to get me sandwich or whatever. I'm not having to get a bus, then a tube, then a taxi somewhere. It just doesn't happen. You walk. There's a really good thing to do. It's just good for your health, believe it or not. But in terms of that, somebody that lives in my street, they work for a university. In fact, they work for my son's university up in Gloucestershire, and they've said since the beginning of this, it was the first time the other day when they drove back up to the university to do a bit of teaching. Everything else has been online, and they said going forward, we're thinking probably we're not going to do that. We're probably not going to all commute for hours a day to do this. We can see the benefits on both sides. And interestingly enough, although some students have said we're not keen on all of this online learning, a lot of others have said, actually, we're really keen on all of this online learning. So, that's a massive, massive cultural change. And as we were talking about it whilst doing the bins, as you do, he was saying, and it saves me a fortune. I haven't had the commute. I don't have to buy sandwiches on the way in because I've got to leave early, etc. I don't have all the coffee to buy, all of that. It's just saved me an absolute fortune. So these things are changing. But then he said something really interesting. He said, when we've been discussing it as a university, one of the things that we thought about is that maybe we will get back to better local communities and better opportunities at a local level, with maybe more of a market town mentality, or market culture on a local basis, coming back with the skills actually, rather than skills having to drive to meet in a skills-based place. The skills will remain local, and actually we'll develop more of a localized economy. Any thoughts on that from both of you?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking to my partner last night about Rishi, because I have a love-hate relationship with him. Like, in some ways I'm like, he's been great this last year. I feel like he's stepped up, and in other ways I'm like, oh, don't say that, Rishi. But what I was saying is, what I find a real shame about the comments that have been made this week is, for all of the Tory spiel about reinvigorating the economy and trying to kind of break down the north-south divide and all of this, surely this is a great opportunity for them to invest in towns and villages and more, like you say, communities outside of big cities, outside of London, and create like hubs where people will go to work. So we do still have a high street, but it's your local high street. It's not jumping on a train and going down to London an hour and a half every day to do what you could do locally. And I think they're missing a trick in terms of what they could do is try and do lots to encourage kind of local, local working hubs and co-working and reinvigorating the local high streets. And they would, from an economic point of view, they would hit their goals then in terms of the revenue targets and bringing in the taxes. The economy would get going again, but it would rebalance it out across the country. And I just think they're missing a massive trick there. But,
yeah. The problem is, of course, I think, Steve, you hit the nail on the head. This is about politics, just as much as it is about economics, because the people who are massively invested in cities are the landlords who own all of those office blocks, the landlords who own all of those shopping centres, and they are prominent Tory supporters, if we're honest about it. So there's a political agenda here, which is not just about, can we actually make this work economically? It's about the types of people who will really suffer if we go along what is obviously a sensible model of looking at, we just have to move things around a bit. Those people who are already invested in those huge, particularly in London, but not only in London, Birmingham, Manchester, all those big cities where that huge infrastructure is. And now people have suddenly realised, I'm not sure this is what I want to be doing, practically overnight. So that business model has suddenly become hugely fragile, hasn't it? And so there's all of that going on. The government have always had sort of different agendas, because they've been saying we support flexible working for quite some time, haven't they? They brought in the right requests. A lot of government departments actually have gone down the route of working flexibly. Yeah. But at the same time, they've always had this slightly sort of strange relationship with it, whereby, but we don't want too many people not commuting, and we don't want too many people not having to support the sandwich shops, and we don't want too many people moving out of large office blocks because of the knock-on effect for the people who own those. So part of me does sympathise with them, because this has all happened so quickly. Yeah. I think if it's been spread over a longer period, I'm not saying they would have then found it any easier, but it would have been easier to implement alternative solutions. When it's something that literally no one could have seen coming, and it's happened overnight in the way that it has, it's a real shock, isn't it? If you're someone with a multi-million-pound portfolio and you can see that getting no income whatsoever, I know Birmingham quite well, Steve. John Lewis moving out of Birmingham, that's a massive big deal, isn't it?
Huge.
That's the hub. I know there are other parts of the Bullring, but that's a huge flagship store moving out of what was a massively successful and popular shopping centre. How that is going to work, and that's just one, of course, how that's going to work in the future is quite difficult to see, particularly as it's happened so fast. So part of me does sympathise with them. Another part just thinks, well, you just got to suck it up, haven't you, and work with what you've got and actually start to rebalance your thinking. But pushing an agenda that says our way forward is to force people to go back into the office, whether it's sensible for them or whether they like it or not, I really think is totally the wrong approach. They want to start thinking pragmatically, as you say, about how can we actually repurpose things? How can we rebalance the economy? We do have an opportunity to address the north. It's not even the north-south divide. It's the London and the rest of the country divide, in my opinion. And I live in the southeast, so I say that. And I've lived in Staffordshire for many years, so I say that from an informed point of view. It's London and everywhere else, isn't it? Really?
Yeah,
London,
it certainly is.
And everywhere else.
Yeah, I do wonder. Yeah, I was going to say sort of not just focusing on where I live, but I do wonder with everything that's gone on. There's a project called HS2 that comes in about 2 or 3 miles of my house. I do wonder if there's been conversations in the corridors of Whitehall going, yeah, that £32 billion we were going to invest in a train network, and actually we don't need the capacity anymore. Exactly. I do wonder where someone's thinking about slamming the handbrake on quite quickly. I know, I mean, as I say, I know from locally, you see a lot of work.
They're so committed to that project now. And the work in Euston is so far advanced, isn't it? And Old Oak Common. I mean, they did have an opportunity about a couple of years ago, didn't they, to say, actually, we're not.
But then transport links in themselves aren't necessarily a bad thing.
No, absolutely. Public transport is a good thing. It's where is it? They should have done the second part of HS2 first, shouldn't they?
Well,
the London to Birmingham bit is not the bit they really needed.
I mean, a bit that none of us have particularly touched on is the environmental impact of all of this, and ultimately, you know, people not driving around in cars so much, not getting on aeroplanes to go all over the world, you know, and ultimately then beyond this, having better public transport links so that we can get to here and there better is a good thing in a way. But then what do you do when you get to the other end? And, you know, are we just seeing that end goal as the wrong thing? Surely it's fine. Let's get to the other end of the country or the other side of the country where we don't normally go, quicker and faster, etc. But maybe it's about, you know, developing the leisure time at that other end of the country, giving people an opportunity to get away from where they live, etc., to experience something new, not necessarily about having to get there for work on a 9-to-5 basis. Any comments on that?
Absolutely. I mean, hasn't one of the really big things that's come out of the pandemic been people rediscovering green spaces, nature, the importance of gardens? So that reconnection with the environment, I think, has been another one of the huge positives that were sort of completely overlooked before, weren't they? You know, so.
And I think in terms of the leisure point, I think a lot of people are doing the staycation again this year, aren't they? And possibly possibly for years to come, because some people might feel uncomfortable going, countries might have outbreaks, or we might just have rediscovered places in this country that are absolutely glorious, and maybe we should be, as you say, Graham, maybe the end point is not about commuting to the other side of the country for work. It's about commuting to the other side of the country to go and to visit and spend leisure time or have holidays or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, that is going to grow a different part of the economy, you know. So I think in a way it's a little bit blinkered. Seeing it as all about, you know, city centres being what city centres are now, etc. I mean, it'd be maybe a bit strong to call this another industrial revolution, but in a way, it's got the undertones of that. In that it could be another industrial revolution, in that in the same way that the industrial revolution really did change city centres. And actually, you know, made city centres what they were. You know, we could see a real change in that. I you know, from my point of view, do I feel that I need to go into London on a regular basis anymore? Probably not. You know, I used to, with work, travel into London on a fairly regular basis. And yeah, it's a great place to go for the buzz. But then perhaps I just want to go to London for the buzz of in leisure time, as I say, in future, rather than necessarily have to do the work bit there as well. Do I really want that? And if that changes the landscape, well, fine. But we've been out for walks around here, and we've discovered, within a mile of where we live, bits and places that we just didn't even know existed. And I expect that's been the experience for lots and lots of people around the country. I would love to see how local centres really developed as proper business hubs, and seeing the experience kept local, and working to develop those local economies and all of the local kind of traditions that go with it. And besides which, in some respect, why wouldn't you want to come here? Cider, for goodness sake.
Exactly, yeah. But you were also talking about walking, Graham. We saw how the levels of pollution in the environment went down at the beginning of the pandemic, when there was so much less traffic around, and even just those few months just gave us a glimpse of what it could be like. We know we've got to do something about reducing the level of emissions. It's just got to be done. It's got to be a priority. And once again, the government's a bit sort of mixed up with it, aren't they? They're pushing electric vehicles, but at the same time they're reducing other green initiatives to provide alternative sources of energy. So it's more, I think they've just got to be brave and think of a coherent strategy that covers the environment, transport, work. All of those things need to be much more joined up than they ever have been in the past. And that's the problem, isn't it? With one hand, they seem to be pushing a particular agenda, but with the other, they're still tied to the past and the old ways of doing things.
Well, we've talked about this in the past, haven't we, Stephen? I mean, at the end of the day, the only agenda that they possibly could have in terms of vehicles at the beginning of all of this, because remember that was on the agenda before the pandemic hit, was we've got to move towards electric vehicles, and we've got to put a date on that, etc. Now, the massive thing that's happened during all of this, we've talked about it before, but I've had lots of conversations with other friends about it recently, is I'd love to know how many families are moving from multiple vehicles down and reducing the numbers.
Fewer, yeah.
There's lots of people that have, through this, gone, do you know what, because my work now can be done here, we don't need two vehicles.
Who needs anymore. 2 cars? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Steve, you obviously were ultimately affected by that, because you were I remember just as we began this pandemic, you were just about to change your car, weren't you?
Yeah, and then obviously I just with circumstances didn't need to do it. And I mean, ultimately we will need to go back to that, but we've certainly been able to reduce our reliance on transport and certainly expenditure. Funny enough, just before the call started, I put my first petrol claim in since October last year. Bear in mind, my role is an external role representing backer and working with clients. So I've just put my first petrol claim in, and it was for virtually nothing. But I can just see in my own personal consumption around fuel, and I think as well, we got into the mixed message piece. I forget the number. Isn't something like 80% of the price of petrol tax or something like that? It's a really high number. Is that again another conundrum that the Chancellor's got? Is that if everyone stops buying petrol, where going to get that revenue from? Do we then have to lump it onto income tax, or do we have to put VAT? It's that whole balancing act that actually, whilst we want to positively impact the environment, are we going to end up with a vacuum behind it where there's no revenue coming in, and therefore do we then have to cut expenditure? So it just goes round and round and round, doesn't it?
Exactly.
You know what though, there are times in history where things just have to physically change.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
I mean, we're
this is one of them, right?
This is one of them, right? I mean, I don't know whether everyone around this table is old enough to remember when cigarettes got
sadly, yes,
changed. But I mean, the agony that the government went through at the time around cigarettes and advertising of cigarettes, etc. Can we afford to stop advertising of cigarettes on TV, etc., because this is a multi-billion-dollar industry, you know, and putting something in someone's mouth that kills them is a really good thing for the taxpayer.
Exactly.
You know?
Not so good for them, but great for the taxes.
And isn't this a similar situation that we've got now? It's like that actually we know that flexible working is good for people. We know that actually for the environment, people not having to travel left, right and centre all over the country all the time to do their work, that's great for the environment, etc. But you know, it's just going to hurt a bit. You know, it's going to hurt some people tax-wise. Some people are going to lose all of their, as you say, all of their portfolio. It's going to go.
One thing we haven't covered, and I should probably cover this as I'm an equality, diversity and inclusion advisor, is how helpful it's been for people with certain disabilities, how impossible life would have been for people who are juggling homeschooling and looking after their kids. But actually, some things would have been impossible for certain groups of people, and it's made their life much easier. We now can actually see a world where people with disabilities are not anywhere like as disadvantaged as they used to be, because getting on public transport when you've got a physical disability is hugely challenging. Getting on public transport actually when you've got certain types of neurodiversity is hugely challenging. So there are a load there. That's just a tiny sample of the number of people who can be positively affected by a different approach to where work needs to be done. Because if you've got your environment actually designed for your disability, that space then can be much better for you to work in. So it's actually recognising that once people have done the work to create an environment that's massively conducive for them to work effectively, not taking advantage of that is just not very sensible, is it? You know, making, oh, everyone's got to come in here. Why? If the work doesn't require it. So that diversity agenda for me has also been another thing that's been really positively affected, not to mention the fact that we also realise that there are certain types of work that people have always said to me, oh, but yeah, customer facing roles can't be done remotely. But even those we have somehow managed to deliver remote. I know there are some companies now saying, oh, I need to monitor what time people are working. No. Please
I think we've got to make it clear. We've got to make it clear that, you know, there are certain roles we very definitely are not saying that there are roles where you can just choose at the drop of a hat whether you're with the client there or then, etc. I mean, you know, my wife's a dental nurse. I'd hate to think that midway through an extraction, she just says, well, I'm going for a lunch break now.
I'm finishing now.
You know, nobody's talking about that. But as you say, within any role, there's a way at which you can look at the, you know, the flexibility of how that role's done. You know, and
it's about treating people as adults, isn't it? And trusting them to be sensible. And you know, the vast majority of people are in that category. And yet we make rules in some organisations for them. I'm not saying there aren't people who abuse systems. Absolutely get that. They are a small minority of people, but somehow we design a lot of our systems around that small minority rather than dealing with those issues on an individual basis, because that's parked in the too hard to do box. So we'll just actually disadvantage everyone. That's how a lot of organisations work, isn't it? And it's so unhelpful.
What I'd love to end on today is from both Jill and Nicola, really, is given the fact that we understand that this flexible working may well be the way forward, what do we need to, what do companies need to do to make sure that they do it right? Because there is an opportunity here to do it really wrong as well. There is an opportunity
Nicola
here
to help them do it.
Yeah.
They don't need me because I'm afraid I haven't got time to help them because I'm doing other things. But
okay, Nicola.
No, seriously, they do actually need sometimes professional support, because a lot of line managers are still very, very frightened that the work will not get done if they give up some of that management responsibility and allow staff to do things for themselves. And I would say that's the biggest key. You need to trust people to deliver, and actually then just give them the opportunity to do that. Micromanagement is, in my opinion, one of the biggest barriers in actually making this work. So I don't know what you think, Nicola.
Absolutely. Go for it, Nicola.
I was going to say, I would agree. So I think, and going back to a previous point, I think how companies can make this work going forward is, firstly, look at the roles in your organization and determine which roles can have what levels of flexibility. So I'm a big believer of every role can have a level of flexibility. But so for example, I'm working with a construction company at the minute. Now, clearly, the people who are working on site cannot be doing like you said, Graham, about your wife. They can't just down tools when they feel like it and go away. So what we're looking at is having, whilst they have more limited flexibility than, say, the head office staff, what flexibility can they have? So can they do some self-rostering? Can they have certain times when they are scheduled to be not working and that kind of thing? So that they still have a level of flexibility. And I think it's about, the first thing is determining like levels of flexibility in the organization. So what works for one organization will not work for all. So what might work and how you want to do it. Then there's the whole culture, trust, leadership piece, absolutely to what you were saying, Jill, which is around, for some companies, the culture is very rigid and they want rules in place, and they want to say, we're going to be hybrid working, but that means that 2 days of the week you're in the office, and it will be Tuesday and Wednesday for this team and Thursday and Friday for that team. And if that's what works for that company for legitimate operational reasons, then that's the way that they will need to do it. And other companies are more like, work whenever you feel like working, as long as the work gets done. Which brings me to my next point, which is, as we've all said before, is measuring those outputs and helping managers get to a point, and lots of development and training for managers to start looking at not when people are working, but what people are doing and what outputs are they producing and what are the outcomes from their work. Because when you can get that right, then it's much easier to then trust people, because you can monitor whether they are delivering or not. As you say, there will always be a small proportion of people who will not perform to the level that you want, or who will, take advantage of the flexibility that you give them. But it will be 1 or 2% of your population. What you need to do is deal with that 1 or 2% as those things arise, and not assume the other 99% of people are going to be taking the mick, because they're not.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, everyone, thanks for a great hour's conversation on flexible working. I hope people get something out of this. What I will do is I'm going to share this link with Jill, with Nicola, with Stephen, so that you can all pre-populate that again on your own accounts, etc. Let's see if we can get as many people watching this as possible, because I think we raised some incredible points. And let's see what people come back with. But
the revolution.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll be at the forefront.
Absolutely. Well, I think someone's got to do it. Someone has to start these revolutions. So and I by no means think it's probably us, but if we can perpetuate that revolution and help push it forward, then that would be a good thing. So thanks all for joining. Until same time next week, then goodbye for now.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.